Mainstream Mental Health Radio with Dr. John Huber.
What do you think you are, crazy or something? Well, you're not.
We're on a mission from God.
News, issues revolving around mental health. Dr. John Huber, a mental health professional for over 20 years, the chairman for Mainstream Mental Health, a clinical forensic psychologist, and a psychology professor at Texas State University. Breaking the silence of mental health, one day at a time, discussing the human condition, providing a sounding board for mental health issues, and making mental health mainstream.
You got a gift, my friend.
Now it's time for Mainstream Mental Health Radio.
Let the healing begin.
With Dr. John Huber. Listening to Mainstream Mental Health Radio with your host, Dr. John Huber. Check us out on social media, Google+, Mainstream Mental Health, Instagram at Mainstream Mental Health, Twitter at Mainstream MENTL, and search for Mainstream Mental Health on Facebook. Please tune in every week to Mainstream Mental Health Radio with your host, Dr. John Huber.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Mainstream Mental Health Radio Show. I'm your host, Dr. John Huber. Remember to follow us at mainstreammentalhealth.org and listen to us on the Mental Health News Radio Network. You can also find us on just about every single podcast site out there, from iTunes to Blog Talk Radio. And if you don't even want to do that, just Google Mainstream Mental Health Radio and we should pop right up. Today we're talking about some very intense things. I grew up in Plano, Texas during the 80s when we had serious high school outbreaks of suicides, and we found out we were doing things all wrong. We were having huge services in schools when somebody committed a suicide, and it actually stimulated other people to want the attention since they didn't get it in life. Hey, I can get this in death. And we were actually known as the suicide capital of the United States back in the 80s in Plano, Texas. So that being said, suicide is a very extreme situation, and it's the choice of the individual who does it. Now, it doesn't always feel like a choice. It feels like the only option they have that's viable to them. So what do we do with that? So oftentimes, we can talk theory all day long. I've never experienced those suicidal thoughts, so we thought it was better to have an expert in there who's actually been down that road. So I want to tell you about when Dr. Jeanne Sanner, she was in her early 20s. She was so despondent that she put her then-husband's Air Force-issued pistol to her head and pulled the trigger. She was unhappy with her marriage, unsure of her sexual orientation, afraid of hurting her family and everyone else she loved, and she decided that the best option was to kill herself. Luckily for her and us, the gun jammed. Jeanne has gone on to live a rich, full life. She would have had missed out on all of it, and we would have missed out on what she's brought to us. So we're glad that the gun jammed. And she's also come to realize that there's no problem that cannot be solved if we seek the right resources. So today we've asked Jeanne to come on, and hopefully she will be able to share a sample formula that she created that's already helped hundreds of people to change their beliefs that led to happier lives. She is the author of Finding Unconditional Love for a Little Piece, Finding Unconditional Love, a Little Piece at a Time. She has a doctorate in spiritual studies, a master's in education, and a bachelor's in psychology. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Jeanne Sanner. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Hello, and how are you?
I'm amazing. I'm glad you're on the phone with me today. So, Jeanne, I kind of summarized things, and I kind of, pluffed it up a little bit for the radio, but put it in your own words, what was going on.
Oh, my. Well, to get to the point where I was in my life, first, my father was abusive, physically, emotionally, sexually inappropriate. So my life started off with low self-esteem. Then I got to the point in my teens, and this was in the 60s, and I found myself being attracted to women instead of men, and I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know why that was. And Then, I just followed what we were supposed to do at that time. I went to college, I got my degree, and then I married this wonderful man who was in the Air Force and realized I cannot live this lie. The end.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. I just can't do it. And I seemed like a pain magnet, John. It was like everything I did caused pain for everybody. So I thought the best thing for everybody was for me to just go bye-byes. And so
Wow.
I took my husband's gun, and he had separated it and put it in 2 drawers, but I had watched him put it together, and I put it up to my head and pulled the trigger, and it jammed. And then when I realized what I had done, my hand started shaking, and I put the darn thing down and was hoping that it wouldn't go off. And I think what happened at that point was a lot of the spiritual work that I had done to come to forgive my dad, which was a real challenge, had served as a foundation. Suddenly I realized, well, maybe spiritually I'm supposed to hang out for a while here, and, maybe there is a reason that the gun jammed. So that took me in a completely different direction, and I went back to the spiritual foundation that I had developed during my teens while I was working on forgiving my dad, but had left me when I got into the marriage that I knew I could not continue to be in. I think what happens is there's a gap. If there is a gap between how we see ourselves and how we would like to be, or how we think others see us to be or want us to be, the bigger the gap, the greater the despair. And you get to a point, you're in the quagmire, and you don't see a pathway out, because when you've gotten to that point, you've lost all of the tools that you need to build the bridge back to well-being. Yeah.
So it's your only option. And it's, it's funny. I read a book that interviewed the survivors of all these people who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Uh-huh.
And every one of them, to a T, said the minute they jumped off the bridge, they're like, what am I doing? I could have fixed this if I just, the minute they jumped. And all I can think of is all the other people probably said the same thing too, only they didn't survive. So, it's such a struggle. And it's almost like when you decide to do it, the weight's lifted, and then you have that moment of clarity.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
yes.
And so how do we as individuals find that moment of clarity? And you were lucky, the gun jammed, and you had that moment of clarity, like the guys on the Golden Gate Bridge. But, the hard part then for us in the mental health field is when we have those people struggling, how do we get that clarity? And I'm really interested in that, and I think unconditional love is a key part of that, because you have to be able to be loved, but oftentimes you have to love yourself first before you can feel and accept that love from everybody else, and it's very difficult
and you
to do
don't
when you're that despondent.
I didn't have any love for myself at that point. There was no love for myself, and even though I knew the people around me said they loved me, and I think they loved me for who they thought I was, but I was very good at presenting a different persona than who I really was. When my husband came home and saw the gun out, he said, "Why is the gun out?" Which was a logical question, and I said, "Oh, honey, I just thought I would, shoot it at the hill in the backyard. I just wanted to know what it was like." And he says, "Well, it's a good thing it didn't go off. They would have heard it everywhere." And I said, "Yeah, well, it's a good thing it didn't go off." Yeah. But he never.
Boy, was that apropos, right?
Yeah, was that apropos at the moment? Yeah, and I'm thinking, oh, little do you know, honey. But he didn't. It never even dawned on him that I would have gotten the gun out to kill myself. It would never have dawned on him. And it didn't. So and one of the things that I'd like to make very clear for those people who are left behind, for those who do succeed in committing suicide, it's very, very important. Oftentimes they'll look back and say, yeah, I should have picked that up. I should have seen that clue. That was a red flag. I should have picked up. And no. If your mind does not entertain the concept of suicide, then you're not on the same path. You're not on the same highway. So there's no way you're going to see the road signs. You just can't. So I'm hoping that if anybody is listening that is in that position, that if you are feeling any guilt whatsoever, please let it go. There are two things happening. One is the person can become very quiet about what they're choosing to do. Okay, and they're making their arrangements sometimes, and then sometimes it's very spontaneous. But the most important thing to remember is no, even if they told you they were depressed or even if they told you this or that, if you have not entertained suicidal thoughts, your brain does not go there, and you would not pick up on that. So
That's
I'm hoping
exactly right.
Yeah, let the guilt go, because it doesn't do anyone any good, and there's no way you would have seen it.
That's exactly right. And so many people, I've met so many people, family members at hospitals with someone who attempted and survived, and they're in ICU, and they're blaming themselves over and over and over, and everybody's trying to console them. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You don't think like that. It wasn't your place to identify this, Yeah, in a perfect world, but we're not in a perfect world. And, in some cases, their therapist didn't even see this coming, and they're trained to look for this stuff.
Exactly right.
And a person who really wants to terminate their life, they've made a decision, and they hide it from everybody, even their therapist. And we have these nice little contracts that give us a sense of liability protection, but it doesn't protect the patient against suicide. It just protects the practitioners against being able to have people go after them. And that's even ridiculous because, again, if a patient really has decided, the therapist aren't going to see it.
Nothing can stop them. And nothing could have stopped
That's
me.
right.
When I made that decision, there was nothing or no one who could have stopped me.
Exactly.
So, that's it. Yeah.
And it's so hard for families to see that. But when they're in that moment of despair, my child is laying in this ICU room, why couldn't I have, fixed their problem? Why didn't I see it? And it's just like the same reason why as therapists, we don't see our own family, because we're too close.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right.
And we either over-catastrophize or we minimize. And that's assuming that they're even telling anybody or letting people know that they want to commit suicide. And usually when they're saying, hey, I want to die, this is the end, they're asking for help. Because if they really had decided, they wouldn't tell me. It'd be done.
That's right. Yeah, I found the same thing to be true, and people would have been, they would have been confused because they had seen me as a happy person, but I had hidden a lot of the pain. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing. If there's somebody listening who is considering, thinking about it, I didn't have the resources available in the late 60s and early 70s that are available now. And I really hope that my life can serve as an example of someone who was where they are, didn't succeed, though it wasn't for not trying. I pulled the trigger. But if I could just share with them the love and the joy and the peace that I have today, and I really feel like whatever quagmire we find ourselves in, there is a ladder we can climb up to get us out. Now, my ladder is a spiritual ladder. That's where I turned. I turned to recognizing that I am spirit, having a tremendously intriguing human experience, and that really I am love, I am peace, I am joy. I don't have to seek those things. Those are the things I am. I just have to unveil them, and I have to eliminate the things that are blocking me from sharing who I truly am. And the way to experience love is to give it, and the way to experience peace is to share it, and the way to experience joy is to, share it. And so that is what has helped me. And the other key thing that has been tremendously important for me is to recognize that forgiveness is the key to freedom. And it's forgiveness of ourselves and forgiveness of those who may have contributed to our choice to see ourselves as lesser than. I had to work through hatred of my dad for the abuse that he perpetuated. And it was through, but the irony with forgiveness, John, is this is huge. I learned several things about forgiveness. First is, forgiveness isn't something we can do. It is the result of what we stop doing.
That's right.
So if we are condemning something, it is insane to think that we can continue to condemn them or it and forgive it at the same time. Forgiveness is the result of when we choose to relinquish condemnation. Now, how do you do that? How do I look at my dad and say, well, what he did was wrong? Period. I mean, how do you judge that? But what I came to see spiritually was, Father, forgive them for, and the expression is, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. But see, I knew my dad knew what he was doing. But what came to me spiritually was humongous. It changed everything. And what came to me was, Father, forgive them for they know not who they are.
That's right.
Now, if we know that we're spirit and we know that we're love and we're coming from that, then we wouldn't do things that would be atrocious. You see what I'm saying? So my dad, once I realized my dad didn't recognize who he was, that he's a spiritual being that is love, and he didn't recognize it, and he was coming from fear. There's only two emotions, love and fear. So if somebody is not coming from love, they're coming from fear, and the only antidote to fear is love. So what I needed to do was see my dad through very different eyes. And what it's turned out to be is my dad has turned out to be my biggest Buddha, my biggest teacher, because I had to overcome the hatred and get to unconditional love. And not conditional love, but unconditional love. And that was quite a journey, John. That was really extensive. But see, I had to see differently. So the key, my formula that you mentioned earlier is P plus B equals E equals A. So it's perceptions plus beliefs. What we perceive plus what we believe about what we perceive creates our emotions, and our emotions fuel our action. So I had to learn to see Dad differently. So instead of seeing him as a really bad father I saw him as a man who was coming from fear, who didn't know what to do with it or how to handle it, and I needed to see him through the eyes of love, and he became my greatest Buddha. He became my greatest teacher, because it's easy to love the lovable. It's when we learn to love that which is perceived to be unlovable in this realm, that's when we stretch our unconditional love muscles.
The whole thing, all I keep saying is to myself, every time you give these phrases, it's like, man, those are words of wisdom. I've been trying to teach that to this person and that person. And everything you said is so on target, and it makes it seem so simple, but it is. You don't forgive for the person who did the harm. You forgive for yourself so you can have your own unconditional love of yourself. Because like you said, if all you do is stay focused on how bad that person is, all you're doing is especially with a family member, there's this unconscious communication that says, well, you're at least half that person, so you're at least half as bad as he is. And I mean, really, It's funny what I've seen through hypnosis with my patients and stuff, and it's like, man, Freud was right on some things. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, I'm a cognitive behavioralist, and all of a sudden I hear this stuff come out of my patient's mouth, and it's like, wow, he hit the nail on the head a couple of times, and it is so true when it comes to forgiveness, because that is you allowing that person to continue to assault you, to hurt you, and to harm you. And you're allowing them to do it by not forgiving them.
There you go. Yeah, nobody can hurt us unless we give them permission to.
That's right.
But what I recognized is that fear comes from the ego. Love comes from the spirit. Now, what we tend to spend a lot of time doing when we come to that realization is that we spend a lot of time fighting with the ego. And I had this image one day. I do a lot of theater. I'm an actor and a director and a coach. And I had this image one day. Oh, yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I was standing on the stage, and the light was coming straight down on me, not a spotlight from out in the audience, but coming straight down on me. And I'm looking down, and there's no shadow. And I start to go stage left, and as I move, a shadow begins to develop. And the further away from the light I get, the bigger the shadow gets. Okay?
That's right.
So then I turn around, and then I started stamping on the shadow because I wanted to eliminate the shadow, and I'm realizing all I'm doing is shadow boxing. I cannot eliminate the shadow by stamping on it, okay? So what I realized was if I lift my head and look straight at the light and just walk straight back to the light, the shadow disappears. It is an illusion anyway. The ego is an illusion. And so if I just keep my focus on the light, which is love, which is unconditional love, if I just keep my focus on that, the ego will disappear. That was
that's
a powerful
so true.
vision to me. Yeah.
That is so true. And, people think about control. Control is a total illusion. The only thing you can control is how you internally respond to the things that happen around you.
Yep.
That's the only control you actually have. Everything else we just perceive where they're doing this because I told them to and I'm their boss. No, they can get up and walk out the door. They don't have to.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. No.
And
we only
you've
have
incorporated
the right
all of that.
to change ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's awesome. I love that perspective.
Well, and the other thing about spiritual freedom is, if we have a spiritual philosophy of we have free will, then we need to honor everyone else's free will to have whatever journey they're on. So if they want to attack me, that's okay, if that's where they're coming from. Now, see, if they're going to attack, then they're coming from fear. The only antidote to fear is love. So I'm just going to continue to love them. And they can dismiss me if they want to, but I'm going to love them.
Now my father-in-law would say, spoken like a libertarian. So
Well, I may be. I don't know. I am fiscally conservative and socially liberal is where I am. But
that's what I tend to be exactly too. So
yeah. Let's take care of our funds. Now that doesn't mean we don't help people. We can help
that's
people.
That's exactly right.
We don't make them dependent, but we can help them. So we teach them how to fish instead of giving them one. So yeah, it's that kind of thing where you just it's all, to me, it's all about unconditional love, and we start with forgiveness, and forgiveness is the key to freedom. And that's where I went from pulling the trigger to today with my life, and I've been with my wife for 40 years. Now, we became legally married in 2008 in California, but we have been together for 40 years, and I am just thrilled. I have a beautiful, happy life where I get to do all the things that I want to do with love. And so there is hope. There is absolute, true, genuine hope. I want to give people genuine hope, not theoretical hope, but I am a living example of yes, you can overcome that.
Well, and that's what a lot of times is so hard for patients to see. They think they're the only one. And, they tend to isolate. Nobody can understand this. And that's where the beauty of things like group therapy really pay off, because they realize that, hey, they had different problems, but they had the exact same internalization and voices talking to them, those internal criticisms. And, group therapy is an amazing process, especially with suicidal patients. But having that insight to be able to basically spell out and isolate, I love it. It is truly unconditional love, and it starts with yourself, and that idea that if I can't love myself, why should I can't even love anybody else. I don't know what that really means. And I love the fact that you were able to put this down in words, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I really hope that it's able to touch some people and to give them hope and to give them freedom and joy, because that's what we all are. So hopefully we can get to the truth of who we are.
Awesome. Well, where can my listeners find a copy of your book?
Well, now that's interesting, because I had published it in 2011 but never marketed it. And so I updated it, and it is just now finished printing. So August 1st is going to be my launch date, where it'll probably be available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and that sort of thing. Right now, I don't have any in print. They're working on that. But if they will email me, I want to give two things. I want to give an email address that they can use, because the email address on my website is not functioning for some reason. And then I want to give my website. So the email is my first name, Jeanne, Jeannie, last name Sanner. It's just like sinner, only the second letter's an A. That's no reflection on my character, okay? So
I got
it's SANNER. So it's Jeanne Sanner 48 at gmail.com. So they can email me, and then I can get them a book or tell them how to get a book. I can send them to my publisher or whatever. But if they want to see my website, the website that I currently have, which is not set up for my book, but it is set up for getting to know who I am and that sort of thing, is JeanneSanner.love. JeanneSanner.love. So it's JeanneSanner.love. LOVE.
Great. Now, are you available for public speaking or other conferences? If somebody has a question, or can they contact you?
Oh, yeah, they can. If they email me any questions, I'll be glad to do that. I am going to be setting up some speaking engagements along the way, but I'm in Southern California, so I'm probably going to do most of the speaking engagements initially in this area, and then move out from there. But yeah, if they email me at Jeanne Sanner 48, is it 48? Wait a minute now. Yeah, I think it's 40. I have to check that because I have some different ones. So it's Jeanne Sanner 48 at gmail.com. Then I will be glad to answer any of their questions and help them get a copy of my book.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to be on our show. And that
God bless
concludes
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That concludes our interview for today, and I want to remind all our listeners to follow us at mainstreammentalhealth.org. Listen to us on the Mental Health News Radio Network, and don't forget that life is what happens while you're making plans. So buckle up.
Thanks for listening to Mainstream Mental Health Radio with your host, Dr. John Huber. Check us out on social media, Google+, Mainstream Mental Health, Instagram at Mainstream Mental Health, Twitter at Mainstream MENTL, and search for Mainstream Mental Health on Facebook. Please tune in every week to Mainstream Mental Health Radio with your host, Dr. John Huber.